AI has captured the zeitgeist of the moment. Many of us have been using ChatGPT or some other generative AI engine and have been amazed at what they can do. Some of us recently saw a research demonstration of OpenAI's new Sora text-to-video model and just shook our heads in wonder. It's amazing to think that conventional wisdom of just 1 year ago was that this capability was probably more than a decade or so away. We're now faced with the inevitability that AI will change our lives in some very profound ways, and left to ponder how it will be applied to solve both business and societal problems. I'm Doug Heinzman, the Chief Catalyst at the Blockchain Research Institute. Welcome back to W3B Talks, an ongoing discussion about how Web3, blockchain, and AI will impact business and society. In this episode, we're going to look at the fundamentals of AI and explore how we might apply AI to our lives and our businesses. To help us in that discussion, we are joined by Praveen Narra. Praveen is the CEO of Tech.us, an entrepreneur, author, and speaker. He has a long and deep involvement in AI and is a strong advocate of the idea that AI can be harnessed by businesses of all sizes to spearhead innovation, fuel growth, and uplift the global community. Welcome to the podcast, Praveen. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Douglas. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Thanks so much for joining us. This really is the topic of the moment, right? Everyone's talking about AI. And I've been through a lot of technology disruptions throughout my career. And they all, to some extent, redefine certainly a sector or an industry. And some of them, things like the internet itself, have very broad impact. This AI topic seems to me a little bit different. It's not new. We've been talking about AI, and we certainly had AI as a fixture in science fiction for a very long time. But in the last year or so, we really seem to have hit a threshold, a turning point, where we start to imagine how it's going to impact us. And we start to think, for perhaps the first time, that we have to start being very careful about how we handle this technology, that it could be a Pandora's box. So with that as a backdrop, let's take a quick step back and have you tell us a bit about yourself, what your origin story is. Can you share with us some pivotal moment that solidified your thinking about AI and what its potential is?
Definitely. So my name is Praveen Narra. I'm with Tech.us for over 24 years now. And we've done over 1,300 software projects. And as a matter of fact, I've tinkered with artificial intelligence 30 years ago in my college. It wasn't even called artificial intelligence. The two courses I did are pattern recognition and image processing. But AI has been rudimentary, meaning that there's a lot of research going on. People want to create innovative things with it, but it wasn't sophisticated enough for various reasons. But about 8 years or so, I've noticed that artificial intelligence is going through this exponential curve where it was able to do things that were not possible before. So it was not necessarily a single moment, rather than a gradual realization that AI is threading through countless aspects of our work and experimentation with AI. If I were to pick one or two moments that really solidified my belief and confidence that AI is going through this exponential curve and will soon transform our lives and people's lives beyond our imagination, I would pick a moment when AlphaGo beat the world Go champion back in 2016. And that was nuts, right? It wasn't just about a supercomputer winning a board game. It was like the glimpse into the crazy potential of AI. Go is, as you might know, a seriously complex game. It has strategy, it has gut feeling, and there's so many hidden patterns that you need to identify. And that would literally take more than 1 trillion combinations of what is possible on a Go board game. And here was Alpha, and it sweeps and wins in this competition. So that was one moment. And the second moment, also in 2016, was when I bought my Tesla Model S. And I was able to self-drive this car. It was not fully autonomous, obviously, at that time as well. But the fact that it was able to drive better than an average human being and avoid collisions. There's great examples of how it can see two cars ahead of you and avoid collisions. It was just mind blowing. So that's when I was like, wow, this is definitely going to become a technology that we cannot live with very soon.
I've had a bunch of these epiphany moments. I remember watching with absolute fascination as Deep Blue took on Kasparov back in the 1997 or so. And the idea that a computer could be the world champion in chess just kind of blew my mind. And I actually got to sit down and play against Deep Blue at IBM's headquarters in or around that period of time. And it turns out it's a very good chess computer. And then I remember the Watson Jeopardy system and the idea that a computer could process an unlimited domain in a deep QA context just absolutely floored me. And then just a few years later, when that great image challenge that Geoffrey Hinton and his team from the University of Toronto were able to understand what all these images meant, that you could identify a tiger or a dog or whatever from images, those first applications of deep learning really started making me think, wow, this is important. And then certainly the Go experience and even some of the new chess engine as well, that first of all, were very good at these games, but they were demonstrating emergent understanding of the games, that there was original thinking here. They were coming up with strategies that humans had never considered before. That to me was another one of those breakthrough moments that was, wow, there's something really important. Then I had a similar experience with you with respect to Tesla self-driving. Because in that, it wasn't just that's impressive technology, but you started to be able to think through how it was going to change society, right? The chess games and the image recognition was like, oh, they're kind of cool party tricks. But suddenly the self-driving thing started to become very personal because I drive, right? And I can imagine what's going to happen to all the transport trucks. And at some point, insurance companies are going to charge you more money if you drive instead of letting the car drive because you're not nearly as good as the car is. And wow, that starts to have these broad implications on society and business. Then that moment, that very first moment when this ChatGPT thing came out and I put in a prompt and then I had to do a regeneration, right? Everyone was doing this thing, do it in the style of a Shakespearean sonnet. And I was floored because, first of all, it's very impressive technology. And I had been familiar with large language models and some of the underlying technologies for a long time, but it kind of spoke to me in a way that was, well, it literally spoke to me in a way that was conversational, right? Because that was the technology. And so I think that in the last year and a half, we, as a much broader society, those people beyond the people that are in this industry, have started to think through the bigger, broader implications of this technology. Even just this past week or so with the Sora demonstrations and text to video, there was two things that really struck me there was, first of all, wow, 60-second long video from a text prompt that had these unbelievable physics accuracies and continuity. I mean, as someone that has looked at this technology, I could really appreciate the technical merit. And part of my brain was thinking, wow, there's this creative arts sort of problem. But then this bigger thought about what does this mean for us all? And where do we go from here? Maybe this is the biggest thing for me was that a year ago, even less than a year ago, if you went back and read all the Reddit streams and stuff talking about where this was, you'd find that question. How long will it be till we can put a prompt in and generate long form video? And almost every response you would have got from very smart people that are in this industry was that's probably at least a decade away. And 10 months later, there it is. Wow. I share with you the sense of wonder and that they are these seminal moments. But let's take a step back from the hype and the wowness of all of this and start to try to make it real. In your view, what's the real core value that AI brings to business and society?
Well, I believe AI is an amplifier of our human potential. I believe AI's core value is to augment our human capabilities, right? So AI can handle the mundane tasks and its vast data sets of information and identify patterns that we cannot. Like just the example that you were talking about AlphaGo is it can strategize and come up with new ways of solving the problems. And the reason it is able to do that is because humans can think in 3, 4, 5 dimensions, maybe. But the minute the number of dimensions grow, the number of constraints increase, then we don't have the IQ to be able to connect dots between hundreds or thousands of different variations. Whereas an artificial intelligence tool can actually connect those dots that we cannot see, and also very subtle thought connections that we can't really make. So I feel like AI has this huge potential that everybody is going to benefit from. There are definitely risks, but also a huge advantage that AI can bring to the table. For example, in healthcare, AI can actually now detect diabetes based on change in your voice. And think about going to a doctor, right? How many doctors are actually going to understand your voice, even if they could? Obviously, they can't, right? They can't really see those subtle changes in your voice. And how do you non-invasively help people identify their health issues? There are also AI technologies that can identify heart attacks much sooner than doctors can. There was this example of a lady who was wearing Apple Watch, and not necessarily just AI, but you can use multiple other technologies to detect these health problems. This lady, I believe her name is Kim or something, based in Maine, and she was sleeping and her Apple Watch pinged her saying, hey, there's something happening due to AFib. There's something called AFib. I don't fully understand the technology, but it understands how your ventricules in your heart are coordinating when your heart beats. And so it figured out a change and it prompted her, and she ignored it for 3 days, but it continuously kept prompting her, waking her up. And she was like, okay, I better go check it out and let me go to the ER. And doctors did figure out that she indeed had an AFib problem, atrial fibrillation or something problem, which is very serious, right? And then that eventually saved her life. So I believe artificial intelligence has power to use some subtle changes in our physiology and identify health problems that doctors can't today.
Well, I think you're on a very important and interesting point. The way that I've always thought of it is that humans are well adapted to reductive reasoning. And this is by virtue of the evolution that our species has been through, that we can reason to root causes and that we've got this linear thought process. But we're not very well suited or adapted to what you might consider holistic problems, especially complex systems. And things like understanding market dynamics that involve huge amounts of sophistication, or doing diagnostics in the healthcare space that involve huge amounts of variability. That AI engines have this wonderful ability to, by virtue of what they've ingested, to develop the patterning so that they can appreciate at the inference stage what's going on. And I think there's lots of fascinating applications of the technology where they can address a bit of humans' blind spot, right? That we're not good at processing holistic problems. And I think that's a big deal, which kind of leads me to my next question. Can you share with us any compelling examples of where AI has already significantly altered the landscape of some particular industry or community?
Well, healthcare definitely comes to mind because there's a lot of research has already been done and being done in identifying the diseases much earlier. There are also examples of AI identifying stroke much earlier in the life of people. And thinking of a broader society, AI is currently being used to offer personalized education. And as a matter of fact, I had the opportunity to meet with Sal Khan, who is the founder of Khan Academy. And using ChatGPT, they started using ChatGPT and experimenting on it long before we got access to it. So what they're working on is creating AI-based personal tutors who can, these AI agents or AI tutors can understand where a student is in his or her journey of learning, what are their learning styles, and what are their challenges, which concepts do they understand easily, which concepts don't they understand, and what is the subtle difference between those, and how can I teach them to learn better? So imagine AI being accessible to people at a much easier and much cheaper cost than real education is. Now you can democratize it, right? Obviously, even in a well-developed country like the United States, there are not enough teachers because teachers are moving to companies that are paying better. Now, if you're able to use technology to build these AI tutors, now you can have 1 million of those turned up by turning on a server. And that can really make a huge difference in people's lives.
That topic of democratization, I think, is really quite profound. As you quite rightly pointed out, this technology kind of changes the cost dynamics of a lot of the way that we interact with information and systems. And with these tools like ChatGPT or some of the diffusion engines and some of their brethren in the audio processing space, an average author can perform at a much, much higher level as we start to use these various different AI engines as research assistants. As we give these engines, we give them samplings of our writing or entire papers and ask them to critique them and to evaluate them and give suggestions about how to improve them. The barrier to performing at a degree of excellence to find audiences, the barrier to entry has fallen dramatically, right? That I can well imagine we already have AI engines that have been able to process radiological images at a degree of accuracy that is much, much greater than the vast majority of radiologists out there. At some point, it means that there are hospitals or doctors or technicians that don't have that degree of elite capability that can augment their degree of training or the degree of competence in a particular field with AI so that they're collectively performing at an elite level. And that's a really interesting phenomena. How do you see this idea of democratizing impact of this technology? How do you see it changing us?
Well, the point you made is so valuable. If you think about doctors, they have learned what they learned either by going to college and learning there or by actually working with people, figuring out, okay, if this person has these symptoms, this could be the case. So if you think about any disease, they may only have knowledge with a few dozen or a few hundred cases of similar challenges. Now, when it comes to artificial intelligence, it can learn literally from millions of different patients who had similar situation, and they can the AI can identify patterns that a human doctor cannot. So that's one advantage. And the second advantage, in my opinion, is think about rural places. There are rural places in the United States where people don't have access to an oncologist or a dermatologist unless they drive 2 to 3 hours to a city to get that kind of medical help. Now, having artificial intelligence kind of technology being available on a mobile app, for instance, take one example, right? Skin cancer. We built technology that it's not FDA approved, it's not peer reviewed, but we actually built it on an experimental basis, an artificial intelligence model that can identify skin cancer with up to 98% accuracy in our control tests. Now, imagine having access to a technology like that where you take a picture of your skin, you're 2-3 hours away from the doctor, you're able to take a picture of the skin, and then it can tell you, is it better to get your, skin checked out or not? Because many times people miss those early signs and then it becomes really serious, right? So that's one area. And the second area, I believe, is financial inclusion, right? Think about the mobile technology. Mobile technology made a lot of people, hundreds of millions of people, come out of poverty because There are people who never had access to a landline, directly got access to a cell phone. Now they got access to WhatsApp. And so there are people in the rural areas of Africa and India that never were able to do commerce with other people or able to negotiate and sell their stuff to people in different cities. And I believe artificial intelligence has a power to lift up a lot more people than the mobile technology did from poverty. So I believe that AI offers this incredible opportunity to bridge the gaps between the rich and the poor. And also think about countries like India, where there are more than 50 languages that are actively being used today, spoken by millions and millions of people. We used to have hundreds of different languages, right? And one of the barriers is communication. So if you want to do business with people in a different state or people in a different country, language was a barrier. Now you have artificial intelligence that can in real time translate the language and bridge that gap so that you are able to communicate with other people. So I believe artificial intelligence has a power to democratize a lot of different fields and societies in our world.
So, boy, that's fascinating, and that discussion prompted a bunch of interesting questions that I'll try to organize here. So, I think your vision about the power of democratization and inclusiveness is very compelling. There are some aspects of the potential pervasiveness of this, and indeed some of those phenomena, that I think still have some open-ended questions. First of all, there is the disruption question. We have had historical periods where there have been technologies that have pervasively impacted the existing industries very broadly, such as the mechanization of agriculture. We used to have 74% of the population involved in agriculture, and we've got 2.8% of the population involved today. But that transition happened over 200 years. So broad implication over over a very long period of time. We've also had examples of new technologies that have impacted very, very small slices of the economy very quickly. The bell operators, the typesetters, the hansom cab drivers, the lamplighters, very, very short period of time, but only impacted a very small number of people, right? 60,000 bell operators. Yeah, the rest of the economy could absorb that labor capacity without really impacting the economy very broadly. But it seems to me that AI, especially in the way you're describing it, and its kind of potential for pervasive impact, may be this really interesting example of a technology that will have incredibly broad impact across many, 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 if not all industries. And if recent history is any guide, may do so in a very short amount of time. And that begs the question, are we ready for the kind of societal and economic and labor market disruptions that are possible if this phenomena plays out this way? And if it does, what should we do about it?
That's a great question. I believe that AI does have broad implications across almost every industry and every person's life. I believe it'll be like electricity, right? Sundar Pichai said that AI is the new electricity. I believe that it's more important than electricity because people will expect artificial intelligence to be ingrained. I expect kind of like invisible AI, that people expect things to be smarter. Think about how we are currently getting marketing communication, for example. There's an email blast that's sent out to thousands or millions of people, and everybody's getting the same message. But people will expect that to be personalized at a level where here is my challenge, solve my challenge, right? So that's one aspect of it. And the second aspect of what you're talking about is once artificial intelligence becomes such a pervasive technology in a good way, there are also going to be industries that will be disrupted much faster than anyone can predict. Think about ChatGPT, for example. Think about Sora, for example. People expected these to take decades, like you were talking about. These innovations happen literally within weeks and months. And I believe that some people are going to have trouble adopting to this level of speed, but our whole human race, I think, will adapt. There's no better example for that than COVID. If you think about what happened during COVID, there were changes that were made to the societal fabric that completely changed the way we lived, communicated, traveled. Like, I did not expect that the airlines would be shut down completely and people would be essentially put on house arrest for months. And that happened. And humans adopted to that kind of a situation. Whether it was good or bad, I'm not talking about that. But what I am talking about is that humans are able to adapt to very quick changes to technology if we have to adopt to it.
Well, I think that you're right that we're adaptive animals and change has always been part of environment. We've always figured out how to deal with it. But to the example you were just talking about, which I think is on point, the one about COVID, it's true that we adapted, but it's also true that the stress of the experience exposed some pretty significant fault lines in our society. Right? I think it exaggerated or it magnified some of the tribalization and the us and them sort of mentality. And it caused us and it continues to cause us, there's a legacy coming out of it, that there's very much an us and them and all these forces that are waging culture wars against each other. And I wonder if the rate and pace and magnitude of AI, especially if you couple it with the potential that all of the productivity and theoretical wealth creation that comes out of this era that we're in, is not equitably distributed, that it gets captured by very small portions of the population that through that capture derive power and influence that is dramatically magnified, that the stress of the disruption and the feeling of the unfairness of the distribution of wealth might cause some significant societal fault lines that are going to be challenging to navigate. Am I just going way out on a limb here, or do you think there's anything to that?
No, you actually have a really valid point. And if you think about the big tech companies, they have so much power, and there are multiple trillion-dollar companies that are taking a big chunk of the AI revenue today. And I think that's going to continue to happen. There was actually a debate and a research done several years ago when the technology was becoming more and more popular and people were adopting to technology. There was this debate about, is it going to make humans become more independent and become more powerful and reduce the power of these big organizations? Or is it going to make the opposite, making these organizations become more powerful? Artificial intelligence needs so much computing power that startups cannot compute at that level on their own without taking additional funding or collaborate with big organizations like OpenAI did with Microsoft, right? But at the same time, artificial intelligence also has ability to empower people. It is yet to be seen how this will play out. But the difference between COVID and artificial intelligence is that during COVID, the governments forced people to do things that not everybody wanted to do, right? Some people cared more about their health. Some people cared more about freedom. Some people cared about meeting their loved ones. And all of those needs and desires were restricted by the government. Whereas when it comes to artificial intelligence, I think we'll have a lot more freedom to choose how much and in which areas I want to adopt to artificial intelligence and which areas I don't want to adapt to artificial intelligence. So I think there will be more freedom than we have seen in the past. I do think that there can be division created because of the haves and have-nots. And I think that is a broader topic. AI can be a piece of the puzzle, but there are bigger dynamics that are at play that need to be addressed. It comes to how do you make AI accessible to a lot more people? How do you help people whose jobs will be disrupted by AI get better jobs? How do you upskill them, cross-skill them so that they can still live a better life? So there are different things that the government needs to do, in my opinion. How much will it do? How much will it not do? Yet to be seen.
I think that's a really interesting question, this question of governance and the role of government in the evolution of the society. I think about some of the recent examples, the Google Gemini problem, where it appears that there has been some programming that has made Gemini an incredibly woke. You ask it for a picture of the Pope, and it shows a young East Asian woman dressed up in Pope regalia. If you ask for a picture of George Washington, it turns out that George Washington is African American. If you ask it if Elon Musk's tweeting is more malicious and evil than what Hitler did, it comes back with an answer that, well, that's a complex subject. And so there's a lot of people that are making a lot of arguments to say that this is big tech putting its thumb on the scale and trying to enforce a woke regime on all of us and all that kind of stuff. But we see some of the cultural fault lines being exposed. And I think that especially with AI's ability to create incredibly convincing misinformation and then to target vulnerable pieces of the population with great precision and effectiveness, that we risk, first of all, exacerbating all the cultural fault lines that we see today, but almost more scarily that a lot of us hopefully have the kind of critical thinking skills that have allowed us to identify obvious lies and misinformation. But as this technology gets so good at doing things so convincingly, even the people with those good critical thinking skills are going to start to question it. And the scary thing is we're going to be questioning things that actually are true, right? Wondering, are we being manipulated? And I have this fear in the back of my head that we're going to end up a lot more paranoid and we're going to lose hold of the common truth that has been so fundamental to the efficiency of transactions and interactions with systems and other people. How do we control that? What role does government have in trying to make sure that this new technology doesn't rip us apart?
Unfortunately, what you say is true, that some of these AI models are answering questions in a way that is completely wrong or is in the borderline or sometimes questionable, right? So the main problem lies in the fact that artificial intelligence is a black box problem. Explaining how complex these computations are and how these AI models arrive at those decisions can be really difficult. And what that means is for engineers, testing these on millions and millions of different topics that people would ask questions about is difficult. So what needs to happen is there needs to be some kind of control where these large organizations embed into their artificial intelligence tools to bring trust and acceptance in people. It's a very difficult thing to answer on how this can be done because it's a really complex problem, because there's brittleness in artificial intelligence, because AI systems can be fooled by unexpected inputs of data and adversarial attacks as well. But I don't know what actually happened where it would make Washington an African-American kind of image, but those definitely need to be addressed.
Well, I think that, there's hallucinations, which is kind of one problem with large language models. And I strongly suspect that we will find ways of mitigating and controlling for those problems, that hallucinations are going to become less and less frequent. That's an engineering problem. I can see how to go and fix that problem. It appears that in the case of Gemini, it appears on the surface that there has been an attempt to program for making things not discriminatory, right? That they don't want it to do certain kinds of things. They don't want it to do pornography. They don't want it to be used maliciously in political campaigns. There's a whole bunch of controls the company wants to put in place. And one of those manifestations is they're doing colorblind casting the way that Hamilton and Bridgerton did, which arguably is actually an interesting way of relooking at history. But still, the Vikings looked the way the Vikings did and all that kind of stuff. So this leads us into this area of the ethics involved. And this concept of either intentional cultural manipulation or malicious political manipulation through misinformation and messing around with political campaigns and elections and such. And even the issue about how we use AI in the military, whether systems or drones should be able to make targeting decisions themselves or adapt in flight. And how do we instill the concepts of value and prioritization and decision-making into these kinds of systems? So there's this whole area of the ethics of this. As you and your company are engaged in building these AI systems for customers, do you have ethical guidelines? Are there lines that you will not step over? How do you deal with that aspect of this domain?
That's a great question. One of the most important things when it comes to AI ethics is to be transparent with your customers, whether your customers are end users or whether your customers are other companies for whom you are building the data. Clearly communicating how the data is being used for personalization and how to transparently give them control on how their data is being utilized, right? So that's one set of things. And the second thing is to anonymize the data and aggregation of data when possible. There are ways you can personalize information without necessarily invading people's privacy. So by giving granular control to the users on what types of data they want to share and what types of data they don't want to share, I think you can give them ability to control that. Think about watching Netflix, for example, right? You would want Netflix to know what your preferences are, what your likes are, what your dislikes are, and give you better recommendations so that you're not sitting there wasting time browsing hundreds of different movies to watch, which happened to me sometimes, right? You want to watch a movie, you go check it out, and you don't really end up liking the movie that you find. So having a great recommendation would be really useful in that kind of situation. But there are cases you want the user to control what kind of personalization they want to receive. So when you give that control, I think that solves part of the problem.
So this area of personalization is fascinating. And to some degree, right now, personalization and privacy considerations is a distributed problem. As we interact with any sort of organization, a bank or healthcare, and even inside of the healthcare world, a hospital or a primary care physician or a specialist, that we have discrete interactions with each of those that expose our particular consent and preferences about personalization and privacy. And many of us have different thresholds that we are happy to give up certain kinds of freedoms or certain information in order to get a better quality experience, and that will vary, and it varies across population, it varies across time. I can imagine a world that we are going to have personal AI assistants that wake up with us in the morning, that understand our schedule, that understand our values, that understand our investment priorities, that we only want to deal with firms that are ESG compliant in some sort of way, that we have certain kinds of political beliefs and we have certain kinds of tastes in dating and in friendship circles or in religion or whatever, and that these digital assistants that will adapt and continually get to know us better through our interactions and perhaps even our direct dialogue with them will be this aura that we project as we interact with all these different systems, so that the AI us on the receiving end have a little discussion with our own personal AI that allows our interactions to be highly customized and personalized. I see us going this way theoretically, but do you have any view on whether that's just complete science fiction or whether we'll end up in that world? And if so, in what kind of time frame?
Well, I do believe that personal assistants will become more prevalent. They're already being used in a narrow sense. I believe they'll become a lot more prevalent where, like you described, they wake up with you, they give you recommendations on what needs to be done today based on your schedule and whatever the case may be. And again, I believe the way to control that is to give control to individuals on what they want to share with these AI agents and what they don't want to share with those AI agents. And also, I believe it is circumstance depending. So there may be situations where you want to provide more information to AI temporarily so that it can go solve the problem and do the research that you want it to do and come back and give you the answer and then forgets about it, right? So I do believe that AI can be built in such a way that users can still control how these AI personalized assistants would solve the problems that users want them to solve.
How do you see AI impacting more of a macro scope, the global economy, international competitiveness? Do you see AI's impact on the global economy being diffused and equal and, as you said earlier, democratizing? Or do you see that certain countries or certain blocks of countries are going to leverage this technology to gain a significant amount of disproportionate power and influence? And related to that, what particular sectors of the economy do you think we're going to see impacted?
I do believe that there's going to be certain countries and certain businesses as well as certain communities that will benefit from AI because they're investing a lot more than others in artificial intelligence technologies. I am hopeful that US will still be the leader because if you look at how much investments that China is making into artificial intelligence, it's just mind-blowing. Here in the US, we don't always get the good news from China, but if you look at what's happening in AI conferences, the kind of demonstrations that Chinese companies are doing, it's just mind-blowing. In terms of robotics and other areas, the level of innovation they're making is in many ways far ahead of where we are at.
I think that's a fair point. I mean, a lot of the story we get about is how they're using it for facial recognition to do social engineering. And the reality is that there's a lot of very practical industrial robotic applications that they're building all kinds of just amazing technology for. But do you think that it's US and China that are going to create a lot of the value? And do you think that the fact that this is where all the research and the innovations going on is going to change the geopolitical system?
Definitely, it's going to change the geopolitical system. And US and China are definitely ahead of the game as of now. India is investing a lot. Israel is investing a lot. Saudi Arabia is investing a lot. So there are several countries that are trying to emerge as new AI leaders in this economy. And the companies and countries that provide the infrastructure and the investment for research and development, I think are going to become economic superpowers eventually, right? So as countries become economic superpowers by using artificial intelligence, that is definitely going to change the geopolitical power dynamics, in my opinion.
Which sectors are going to be impacted the most?
I believe education and healthcare are the two sectors that will have the biggest implications in using artificial intelligence initially. And once you have people educated better, that's a long-term thing. But if you think about countries where education is not easily available to people, and if they have AI tutor on their mobile phone that they have access to through which they can learn, I think the whole economy can grow into a better society, right? And I do believe that there will be unpredictable disruptions in using artificial intelligence. If you think about ChatGPT, like you said, right, overnight, there was this capability that people had in their hands that they didn't have just a few weeks ago. And now looking at Sora, people didn't expect that innovation to happen so quickly. There are people who are changing their business models because of this unpredictable disruption that is happening. I just read a story where this movie mogul is abandoning his plan to build a huge media animation company where he was planning to invest $800 million after he saw Sora completely disrupting that industry. So I do expect these unpredictable disruptions to change the dynamics of the game. But I do believe that there are many countries that are trying to get ahead in this global race.
What about sustainability and climate issues? I mean, these are in many ways, the existential and most fundamental problems that we're facing as a species that transcends all the geopolitical considerations. Do you think AI can be a force for good in addressing ESG environmental issues? And do you have any examples of AI-driven initiatives that aim to promote sustainability or mitigate the worst effects of climate change?
Absolutely. I think AI can benefit in many different ways when it comes to climate change. If you think about technologies that are available to capture carbon and store, the AI can aid in development and monitoring of carbon capture technologies. And also there are areas where AI is being used to reduce waste reduction by enhancing recycling processes. When the garbage gets collected from our homes, it is being sorted where the plastic is being removed artificially by recognizing these using computer vision and then recycling those materials. Even in agriculture, there are AI technologies that are enhancing the efficiency by minimizing the water usage and usage of fertilizers, not only improving the climate, but also improving health of people. There are drones with AI-driven sensors that monitor the crop health, and they can actually monitor soil moisture, and then they can inform the farmers how much water needs to be supplied to their farms and how much fertilizer is necessary.
So you're an optimist? You think that with all the daunting challenges we face, that AI has a lot of potential to help mitigate the worst effects of climate change?
I do believe that. There are debates about whether this climate change is really human-made or if it's general change in the Earth. I'm not an expert in that, but I do believe when it comes to artificial intelligence, right?
Well, at some point, I personally believe that the science is pretty well resolved in that, but at some point it doesn't matter, right? Whatever the cause is, it's a real issue and there's real consequences, and we're already seeing that. So the question is, can we do anything about it? I mean, I was even thinking about using AI to discover completely novel battery chemistries, right? That will help us accelerate the transition to electrified transportation, right? Those sorts of things. I mean, do you see applications of AI to help innovate other technologies, develop carbon capture technologies or whatever?
Definitely. I think AI has huge role to play in material sciences where they can identify new materials in battery, for example, that can help solve some of the limitations current battery technology. But I believe the implications of AI can be huge in areas like we can't even understand. So one example I can give you is if you think about the Amazon forest is one of the main sources of oxygen for all of us. And they have found that the trees in Amazon forest are dying. And one of the reasons they're dying is because of the change in climate. And what apparently happens is the wind carries this dust particles from Sahara Desert all the way in Africa and then deposits that in Amazon forest that actually helps the forest to grow. And because of this climate, that is being disrupted. Now, imagine us understanding those kinds of minute things that have such a huge impact. Now, there are satellites that can track all of that and help mitigate some of those risks. So I do believe artificial intelligence is a power for good. There are going to be bad things that people will use artificial intelligence for, definitely, right? But overall, that will happen with any technology. That happened with books, that happened with computers, that happened with internet, and it is going to happen with artificial intelligence. However, on a bigger scale, I think artificial intelligence is going to be a force for good.
If I had to summarize what you're saying there, I think you're saying that if you have the ability to model very complex systems, then we've got much better insight into developing strategies and prioritizing our efforts, and that generally that's a good and healthy thing to do.
Exactly.
I think that's what you were saying. So I've heard you say in the past that ChatGPT is no longer a competitive advantage. What do you mean by that?
Well, artificial intelligence is definitely a game changer. There are people who miss the prior tech booms, like mobile boom or internet boom. I believe they do have a second chance. Like I said, artificial intelligence, I believe, is the next technology, kind of similar to electricity, a technology that will be ingrained in every industry and people will take for granted very soon. And without it, I believe our devices and our communication and everything will not be as effective as it can be. So imagine a business choosing not to use electricity today, right? They'll be left in the dark and they will not succeed, right? I think AI is heading that way as well. ChatGPT is amazing as it is, but it's just the beginning. If you think about what people are able to do with ChatGPT, you can use it in marketing, you can use it on operations in different areas, but that is being commoditized. Think of old times when electricity was first introduced. If there was a single business in a town that had electricity, they would have a huge advantage because they can turn on the lights and keep their shop open for much longer. Whereas when everybody else gets access to electricity, that edge is gone. And I believe ChatGPT is nearing that point and it is becoming a standard. Everybody will have access to it.
It's amazing that we're only a year into this and already that isn't the state of the art. And what I find it extraordinary to think that all of these marvels that make us just shake your head or say, oh, that was spooky, that this is the worst the technology's ever going to be going forward, right? What we have now is the worst version of it that we'll ever see in our lifetimes. And
that's absolutely true. ChatGPT is just text-based, right? Now, Gemini is multimodal. So once you understand, not only from text, but from images, from code, from videos, then that completely changes the dynamic. But imagine, just like artificial intelligence can learn from multiple dimensions, there are other dimensions that we can't even understand that artificial intelligence is able to understand from and help us live our lives better.
Yeah, I think you just touched on multi-model. That is such a fascinating idea, the idea of an executive looking at different models, as well as the long memory capabilities of the Gemini model. These point us towards the future and what we can do with multi-model and long memory. I don't think we've even scratched the surface, which begs the question, as you look to the future, what AI trends or technologies, or what predictions would you make about this is what we're going to see, and this is going to be really, really important or impactful? What's your prognosis? Where do we go from here? What happens next?
Well, so I believe that there is going to be hyper-personalization in how we experience the world. From education, like I was talking about, from marketing, from sales, the whole experience will be personalized to one person rather than to all the people in their email list, so to speak. So that's one area. And the second area that I think will have a huge impact is robotics. Like if you think about how much innovation is happening in robotics because of the growth in artificial intelligence systems and GPUs and TPUs, it's just mind-blowing. Now, there are AI-based robots that are cleaning our homes, like iRobots, for example. But I believe that robots will become like computers, where if you think about the old times, only large businesses had access to computers. Now, almost every human being who can afford a computer can have a computer. And robotics today are available in big organizations. Think about Tesla. The cars are being manufactured by these powerful robots, but most of us don't have robots in our house. I think that will become a norm where everybody can have a robot in their house that can help them. I'm also very curious to see what's going to happen with brain-computer interfaces. Obviously, there's a lot of innovation that's happening there. And if we are able to interact with our brain and understand human emotions at a deeper level, I think that can completely transform the computing and how we are able to help people that are disabled, but also people who want to take their abilities to the next level.
Well, we could continue this conversation infinitely because there's just so much to talk about here. And of course, if we revisit this conversation in 6 months, all the stuff we've been talking about will be so
already
months
outdated.
ago. Actually, I'd love to get into a conversation about what your thoughts are, whether we're going to make any really big breakthroughs around reasoning systems. Because I personally believe that reasoning systems are going to be quite transformative. And I think OpenAI's got a project called QStar that I think is showing some real potential there. We could go on forever on this kind of stuff. As we draw this particular conversation to a close, what kind of key takeaway would you want listeners to have to think about going forward?
I believe that the technology is evolving so quickly that everybody has to become a lifelong learners. My parents were teachers, and they were teachers for 35 years. And so the amount of new things they needed to learn didn't change much because the books didn't change much. They had to teach the same things. And if you think about most people's parents or their grandparents, they work in the same factories, doing the same things for many, many years. That's not going to be the case anymore because things are evolving so quickly. So both individuals and organizations must commit to continuous learning and adaptation to keep pace with these AI enhancements and advances that are happening, to be effective, to be relevant to what the market needs. So that's one thing. And the second thing I believe is focusing on the augmentation. Definitely there are going to be fears about what AI is going to disrupt and things like that. Viewing AI as a tool to augment whatever you're doing. If you're a coder, how can you use AI to do your job better? If you're an artist, how can you use AI to do your job better? And by using these tools, I think you can be more competitive and your employers will find you more useful than other people. So as companies cut down their workforce because of AI or other forces, I think people who are innovative, who are using these AI tools better, will have a better opportunity. And lastly, I do believe that while there are many things using AI that are really cool and sometimes distracting, focusing on what are the pressing challenges that are faced by you and your customers, and using AI to solve those problems is more important than getting distracted by shiny objects. As long as we do that, I think we'll be relevant.
I think that's very, very sage advice. Thank you so much, Praveen, for joining us today and sharing your insight and wisdom with us. And thank you all for joining us for this episode of W3B Talks. You can find out more information about tech.us at www.tech.us. You can also find out more information about this and many other topics at blockchainresearchinstitute.org. And while you're there, please consider subscribing to our newsletter. I'm your host, Doug Heintzman. We hope that you have enjoyed this episode and that you'll join us for our next episode of W3B Talks. Once again, thanks so much, Praveen.
Thank you for having me, Douglas. Take care. Bye-bye.